Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. David Glassner, Superintendent of Shaker Schools, and I am here providing another update as we prepare for the start of the school year for the 2020-2021 school year. Thank you, everybody, for joining me. As always, I want to go through just some reminders. I provide these video updates twice a week now on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 3:00 p.m. every day. And these videos are available for viewing on the Zoom platform as well as on our Facebook page. You can get the link on shaker.org, our website. You are welcome to post questions either in the Zoom chat feature or in the Facebook chat feature. We do answer questions that are submitted in advance, but we will monitor those chat boxes for questions so that we can answer them at a future date. Also, I wanted to let everybody know that we continue to be immersed in planning for the fall school year, for the start of the school year. We have been waiting for the governor to release statewide guidelines related to the start of school year. We have been hopeful that maybe those guidelines will be released today. It does not appear that that will be the case at this point, but we do hope that the guidelines will be released later this week. Based on everything that we know so far, it does seem like our planning really is in line with the guidelines that we expect to be released. Nevertheless, those guidelines will be helpful to have in hand and will help guide future discussions related to what the start of school will look like. But in the meantime, while we wait for those guidelines, we are certainly continuing with our planning for the fall. One of the things I wanted to mention today, which you may already be aware of, but I think it is worth mentioning, is that we have seen in Ohio and in states across the country that the number of COVID-19 cases continues to rise. It is a good reminder for us that the health and safety protocols and routines that we've been following for the past few months are necessary. They have had an impact so far, and as we plan for the school year, we really are prioritizing the health and safety and welfare of our students, staff, and families. And we cannot take this lightly. And like I said, we're seeing evidence of this now as the number of cases continues to rise. So we remain and continue to be vigilant in terms of incorporating health and safety protocols and guidelines into our planning for the fall. Yesterday, I had the opportunity to meet with leadership from the Shaker Heights Teachers Association. It was a collaborative meeting with the Shaker Heights Teachers Association Executive Board, as well as a number of different administrators and other leaders who are helping to plan for the fall. It was a great meeting. I'm glad we had the opportunity to talk through questions and concerns. And I'd like to especially thank the SHJ President, John Morris, for being open to that meeting. And I imagine we will continue, I know that we will continue to collaborate with the Teachers Union as well as with our other employee bargaining groups as we plan for the fall. And of course, one of the things that we spoke about, among other topics, was the prioritization of the health and safety of our students and staff as we think about in-person learning in the fall. As I've said previously, this forum is not meant to just be an opportunity for me to speak to our community. I also hope to invite guests, other folks who are involved in this planning for the fall, to participate in these updates. That may happen on Thursday. Part of this depends on when the state will release their guidelines. If not, I certainly anticipate being able to invite guests in the near future who will be able to speak with their own expertise and experience related to topics such as transportation, operations, special education services, learning and teaching, transportation, and all those things. So I look forward to that in the upcoming sessions. I also want to highlight the collaboration that we've had with our families up until this point, and we've been getting lots of input and feedback from through a variety of different structures. As I mentioned before, we have a family advisory committee that is providing input and feedback into our fall plans. We also have a standing feedback form on our website, which I encourage anybody to fill out anytime they have feedback they want to share, questions or concerns or ideas they want to provide to us. We have a question submission form for these sessions specifically if people want to ask specific questions. And of course, there are always ways to contact school level administrators and district leaders in regards to any input or feedback that you may have. So thank you so much for everybody for all of your input and feedback as this process unfolds. All right, with that, I want to jump to some questions that we've received over the past couple of days since we last gave the update. In the last update, I was able to divide them up by topic. This time, they're a little more widespread in terms of the questions we got, so I'm just going to take them one at a time. One question asks about whether we are considering some of the remote options that are being announced in other districts. This person highlighted the work that is taking place currently in Tampa, Florida. We are certainly looking at what other districts, states, and even countries are doing as they open school or have in-person learning or plan for the fall. For example, actually, right before the session, I was looking at a plan that's come out of Wisconsin schools. And so, you know, we're also collaborating locally. I'm in touch with other superintendents at least twice a week, if not more frequently, to review plans that we're seeing or ideas that we're hearing about. So, but I do appreciate this person bringing our attention to the Tampa, Florida plan. And of course, anybody who has other plans or ideas, you are welcome to share them with us. The next question is around our start date. Cleveland Heights has suggested they will start later and use the extra summer weeks for professional learning, and also as an opportunity to better identify and locate students who did not respond to work or who are falling behind from the previous spring. I have no idea how many kids fall into this group, but it seemed like this is needed outreach. So I have heard of a couple of school districts or a number of school districts that are considering or already planning to delay their start date. Currently, that is not something that we are moving ahead with, though of course that may change. But you know, here in Shaker, I think we're fortunate because we already have 4 days of professional learning built into the beginning of the school day, the beginning of the school year. Our 4 days of professional days, where all staff and faculty come together to prepare for the school year. So we have some time already built in. We also have lots of faculty and staff busy at work already this summer. And so right now, our goal, you know, unless something changes drastically to change this thinking, but our goal is to start the school year as we normally would. I think actually also this question for me kind of raises the question about what the next few months will look like. Given the rise in COVID cases and the challenges that come with in-person learning, we understand that there is a real possibility that we may need to have some classes or schools or the entire district go back into an extended closure model again at some point in the fall or winter. And so if we are able to have in-person learning at the beginning of the school year, we kind of like to start that as soon as possible, knowing that things may change as the school year progresses. But of course, as I've said before, kind of all things remain on the table, and we will continue to consider this as a possibility as needed over the next few months. Next question, is there any way to receive teacher placements and schedules in July to allow time for parents to make arrangements with work and childcare? If we are on some form of a hybrid schedule, it would be especially helpful to know if our kids are in an A or B group, what days they'll be home and who is in their classes. Parents with kids in the same class might be able to share childcare. Our goal is to, in terms of our time frame, our goal is to try to have a plan in place by around the beginning of July, so in the next couple of weeks. And I know that doesn't answer the question directly around when you will get your student-specific schedule or class placement. We do recognize that that information will be helpful. We will do our best to get information out to families as soon as possible, starting with the kind of structure that you should expect to see in your schools for the beginning of the school year. along that same note, I mean, I want to reiterate, and I know I've said this before in previous updates, that at this point, all options continue to be on the table. We are looking at hybrid models. One of those models, the lingo I know I've shared before, is the 2-1-2 model, where students are in school 2 days a week and then are participating, engaging in virtual learning 3 days a week. We are also looking at 5 days of school in person for students. I know I've gotten a number of questions about whether or not we are considering it. We are exhaustively considering it and not dismissing it at all. As I've written in some of my email responses, 5-day in-person learning may be more feasible for students at younger grade levels, particularly K-4. But nevertheless, we're looking at creative options for all of our grade levels. Once those structures are defined and identified, and we have a plan for the fall, we will then move on to things like student scheduling, placement, and those class placement and those kinds of things, so that we can get that information to families as soon as possible. The next question actually is kind of related. If we have to use a hybrid model for school, will families be able to have input on what days their child would be attending school? This person asked the question because they're thinking of families who may have to balance or juggle work schedules. We will try our best to work with families to the extent possible. I know that one of the things that we're looking at is if we have to go on a hybrid schedule, we want to try our best to make sure that students from the same family group do have school the same day, because we know that that would make it easier related to childcare and work schedules. In terms of whether or not people will be able to request specific days, I'm not sure whether and how we'll be able to accommodate those requests yet, but that's certainly something we'll keep in mind as we plan for the fall. The next question has to do also some with planning for a hybrid model, and really about some of our operations. Why do we need to have a full day of deep cleaning? So just to explain some background behind this question, if we're in a 2-1-2 model, one of the ways that model can be implemented is you have students in person on Mondays and Tuesdays, then Wednesday is a deep cleaning day, and then Thursday and Friday, you have the next group of students coming in to learn. So this person continued, can we consider using Saturdays and doing 3 on, 3 off? Much of Shaker wants 5 full days with a plan in place when someone gets sick. Is this still being considered? Can't those who are not able to go have all classes live streamed as a norm? So I'm going to try to answer as many of these questions as possible, as specifically as possible. So the first question relates to whether or not we have to spend a day doing deep cleaning. That is something we're looking at. You know, we have a great custodial team. Our operations team is looking at whether or not we can strategically place or assign custodians to buildings to make sure that we can, you know, for example, start cleaning in the afternoon and make sure that cleaning is done by the morning. So we're really, you know, front loading custodial shifts in the afternoon, evening, and nighttime. So that is something that we are considering. I think also, you know, deep cleaning certainly has its place. We also want to make sure that it's clear that we recognize that if we clean a building entirely and do a deep cleaning, if somebody comes into that building who has COVID symptoms or who is sick, you know, we're going to have to clean again. And so, or we have to figure out a way to have kind of a continuous process, not just rely on one very specific deep cleaning model. Can we consider using Saturdays? Certainly weekend cleaning will be part of the equation in terms of making sure our buildings and learning spaces are clean and ready for staff and students. As I mentioned before, the next question has to do with whether or not we're continuing to consider a 5-day plan. As I mentioned before, that is something that is certainly still on the table and that we're looking at pretty exhaustively. And then the last question, can't those who are not able to go have all classes live streamed as a norm? I have spoken with our tech department about the possibility of live streaming classes. It's something we're still looking at, but there are some pretty significant challenges to that. Some of those are technology related. You know, for example, things like bandwidth and the devices that we'll have available to ensure that we can live stream. But there's also a real question around engagement and student confidentiality. And so we're looking at it, but it does not seem to be our preferred so far. It hasn't risen to the surface as the best method for engaging students who can't go. We are looking at a virtual academy, putting in place a virtual academy where students who are unable to attend school in person can register or enroll in a virtual academy and receive or participate in their learning that way. The next question has to do with meal distribution. If we go to school, if students are in school in person for 2 days out of a week, would meals be provided to students for the off days? That's certainly something that I imagine we will continue doing, similar to what we've been doing up until now, where we are able to provide meal distribution for students even when they're not in person. We recognize that meal distribution is important. And we've also been lucky enough, our food distributor, our food provider, AVI, has done a great job of thinking creatively about how we get meals to students and even how we get meals to students for multiple days in a row, so that I may pick up my breakfast and lunch on Monday, but that includes meals for Monday and Tuesday, let's say. So that's something that will continue to be a part of our planning for the fall. The next question has to do with materials that will be provided to students. Will kids be provided with textbooks or other written materials to help parents? Can on-paper homework be provided to limit screen time and preserve bandwidth for multiple persons working from home? Interestingly enough, I was in a conversation earlier today about this very question, about what kind of materials and supplies will we be providing to students at home? Obviously, part of the answer to this question depends on what kind of structure we have in place for students in person. We also certainly recognize that there is a need for students to have supplies at home if we are continuing or at home learning or virtual learning. So that is something that we're working on. An example from the spring that I know we discussed quite a bit, where things like art supplies are those materials that we can have students have at home in addition to having them at school, in case we're in a hybrid model. So that is something that we recognize is something that we're going to need to plan for in the fall. And this question about on-paper homework, this past fall, we did provide, especially for our younger students, packets of learning materials that families were able to pick up or that we mailed home. That's something we're looking at for next year. I think partly depends on whether and how students are in person, because we want to make sure that we have a way to distribute assignments or paper homework if necessary. And so that we can address technology issues at home. So that's something we're looking at. We have learned the strengths and some of the challenges that come with using just technology or just devices for in at-home learning. So something that we're looking at for the fall. And then I think there was a question specifically about Fernway. If we are looking at spreading K-4 students over several buildings, please keep Fernway fourth graders at Fernway so that they have a last chance to enjoy their brand new building for the school year. Absolutely, and this is a bit of a tangent, I know, but I had the opportunity to visit the new Fernway building about a week ago, and it really is a stellar building. I am looking forward to the day when our students and staff can take full advantage of the building, and we certainly want our Fernway students to be able to have an opportunity to enjoy that building. Question about outdoor classrooms. Has the district looked into outdoor classrooms? We've gotten a form of that question in different ways. Certainly being outdoors, we know from our experience over the past few months that being outdoors can be safer or healthier for students and staff. While some of our students may be able to meet outdoors on kind of a limited basis, we know that as the weather gets colder, that's going to be very challenging. So at this point, we don't expect outdoor classrooms to be a long-term possibility for all of our students, but it may be something that some teachers and students are able to take advantage of in the early fall before the weather turns. Has there been any thought given to students in K-4 looping with their previous year's teacher? That is something that we've talked about in past years, not only when we're faced with a pandemic. It's certainly something that we're open to considering for the fall. and I know this, I may sound like a broken record at this point, but our teacher assignments really depend on the kinds of structure that our students will be participating in the fall. So we're certainly open to thinking of how we can loop teachers if needed. I think beyond looping though, one of the things that to me this question brings up is the idea that we know it's really important for our students, particularly younger grades, but really across all grade levels, to build strong relationships with their teachers. And for students who are meeting their teachers for the first time over a computer screen or in a hybrid setting, we know that can be maybe more challenging than it has been in past years. In our conversations as we plan for the fall, we're already taking into account or thinking about what kinds of orientation activities, what kind of relationship and community building activities can we build into the start of the school year, particularly for younger students, but for all grade levels, so that no matter what teacher a student has, the student gets to know the teacher well and the teacher gets to know the student well. We know that that's going to be critical no matter what model we're under next fall. Next question. We know that keeping social distance, practicing excellent hygiene, and constantly wearing masks are the ways to prevent transmission, and yet these are hard things for even adults to do. How can schools ensure that children do this safely? So first of all, I want to very much agree with this question and just highlight some of the things that this question highlights. So we know that keeping social distance, so maintaining that 6 feet apart, is really important. We know that excellent hygiene, so washing hands regularly or using hand sanitizer regularly, disinfecting public spaces, those are all really important. And that wearing masks are all, those three things really seem to help limit the spread of COVID-19. And those are things that we are making sure are integrated into our planning for the fall. And I know I was in a meeting yesterday where this came up, and we think that it's going to be critical that we engage and participate in those health and safety guidelines. The next logical question is, how do we make sure that everybody abides by them or adheres to these rules? We are starting to develop educational programming for students and families and staff to prepare them for being in school, to make sure that everybody is aware of what kind of guidelines everybody is expected to follow. We're also starting to discuss the what if scenarios. What happens when somebody isn't abiding by these policies or practices or guidelines? How can we respond? We know we want to make sure to respond in a way that is full of empathy and caring and nurturing, while also making it clear for everyone involved, whether that's students, staff, or families, of the importance of maintaining these health and safety protocols in our buildings so that we can continue to provide in-person learning if possible. In the last update, the results of the fall reentry staff survey were referenced. Although not complete at that point, about 1/3 of the staff indicated they were not comfortable returning to in-person school. Is the district considering tag team teaching, particularly for the elementary school grades, so that in the hybrid model, students will still receive some teacher-led learning on home days? I'm not totally sure I understand this question, but I think the answer to the question is yes. We understand that there are going to be students and staff that for a variety of reasons may be unable to come into our buildings. That's one reason why we're setting up the virtual academy. We're also looking at ways that we can provide opportunities for staff to teach virtually who are able to do so. We're still working out the specifics. If we are in a hybrid, like a 2-1-2 model, we're still working out the specifics of which teachers will be teaching in person, which teachers will be teaching online or remotely. But that's definitely a detail that is part of our planning process. Next question. I've heard a few people ask about lab sciences at the high school and how they will be handled. Someone suggested labs may be done all at the end of the school year. That is not something we have determined yet. Lab sciences, along with other, what I'll say, hands-on subjects like band or art or some of our engineering courses, we recognize that there are some unique challenges or things that we need to consider as we plan for the fall. Certainly lab sciences falls into that category. Next question, will AP exams be required if the school year goes to these adaptive schedules? Is there ever a scenario where AP exams are optional for Shaker students? That's still very much up in the air. This past spring, we aligned our practices with the AP, the College Board guidelines related to AP exams. So far, College Board has not yet fully released their expectations or guidelines for next school year's AP exams. That's something that we will certainly be looking at and working on over the next few months. Similar question, IB exams were canceled for this past school year. Have you heard if that would be considered again this year if the school year has disruptions? Again, like the College Board, the International Baccalaureate is already looking at ways to continue to ensure that students are engaged in robust and rigorous learning. And I imagine that there's some way to measure that, but they have not yet determined or publicized a final plan yet for the next school year. I have about 2 minutes, so I'm going to answer one last question, and then I will get to other questions. I'm sorry I couldn't get to all of them today, but I'll answer other questions in future updates. So this will be my last question. As a retired teacher of primary school children, I am well aware of the sometimes unbearable heat in classrooms during August and September. Will wearing a mask all day be impossible for young children and staff when the outdoor temperature is 90 plus? How will the district address this issue? Certainly agree. I know I've had experience wearing a mask already this summer, and it can get uncomfortable when it's very hot outside. We're looking at different options. We know it's important to keep air circulating in classrooms, and that's something that we will continue to consider as we move forward with planning what to do specifically on very hot days. Before I close, I just want to give a few reminders. There's a special Board of Education work session this afternoon in a couple of hours at 5 o'clock today. We will be discussing the planning for the fall in a lot more depth at that meeting, so I encourage everybody to attend virtually if you are able to. Also, there is a panel that we are co-sponsoring with a number of different organizations, including the PTO, New One Shaker, and the League of Women Voters. That panel is happening tomorrow at 7 o'clock. The focus of the panel is really thinking about the social and emotional well-being of our students during this pandemic time. There will be a number of different panelists, including our Chief Academic Officer, Dr. Marla Robinson, will be a part of that panel, along with other health and wellness experts, and I encourage everyone to attend that panel if you are able to. And lastly, as I've mentioned before, this work, we are very much involved in this work. We are looking at all different options, and we continue to move forward in planning for the fall. And I'm happy to continue answering questions and providing updates as this work continues. Thank you, everybody. I hope you have a great afternoon, and see you soon.